Chapter 28 Abhedananda in America, the early phase. We have to grow like the flowers, close to the earth, in beauty and simplicity. Then the fragrance will do its work like the fragrance of the flowers. These words of Swami Abhedananda reflect to some extent the true character of his life as a Hindu preacher. A close study of this part of his life reveals to us that it actually grew like a flower, close to the earth, and the process of its growth went on spontaneously for a period of 25 years, spreading all over its fragrance in America and Europe. That fragrance has left its lasting effect on the minds of the religiously inclined people in those two continents, as well as in the land of his birth. And history has accorded to him a niche in the Hall of Fame as one of the most remarkable Vedantic thinkers and preachers. The fragrance came out of the innermost recess of his soul, from the very moment he appeared on the world stage. Thus, it was inevitable that the young preacher who landed at the port of New York on the 6th day of August, 1897, was destined to fulfill a mission that was sanctioned by history and sanctified by the age-long spiritual tradition of India. Before going abroad, when he wrote, "It is now high time for us to send Hindu missionaries like Swami Vivekananda to distant lands for diffusing the highest doctrines of the Hindu religion." Was he then thinking in his mind about the role that awaited him? It is not unlikely. And the young preacher who set foot on the soils of America was fully equipped, as the subsequent story of his life will reveal to us. On Friday, 6th August 1897 at 3:30 p.m., after sailing from Southampton by the SS St. Paul of the American line, I landed at the port of New York, the commercial capital of the United States. Thus begins the American diary of Swami Abhedananda. The first difficulty which he had to encounter on landing there was with the customs authorities in respect to a box he was carrying with him. The box contained a few Sanskrit books on the Vedas, Upanishads, and the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy, which he brought from India at the request of his Vivekananda. They demanded an exorbitant duty on those books, but he had no such money to pay. Naturally, he was in a great fix, as he was alone and no one was there to receive him, because the steamer had arrived at the port before the scheduled time. At last, after long consideration, they decided to let me go free of all customs duty for these books. Abhedananda was penniless for the most part when he landed at the dock, and therefore he had to wait long, though all the passengers had left the place. None came to receive and welcome him, and after useless waiting for hours, he took a cab with his luggage, which then drove up to Miss Mary Phillips' house at 19 West 31st Street, the address he had fortunately with him. Here he alighted from the cab and pushed the electric bell at the main door. Presently the door opened, and there stood at the doorway a young lady who seemed to be a maidservant. "Is Miss Phillips in?" "Yes. Would you mind giving this to her?" So saying, Swami Abhedananda handed his visiting card to her. The maidservant went in a while, and he kept waiting inside the door. Miss Phillips hurried down from upstairs and was very much surprised to see Swami Abhedananda alone at the door. "Why are you alone? Where are Mr. Van Hagen and the others who went to meet you at the dock? Did you not meet them?" "No, I did not meet anybody, although I waited at the dock for a long time after all the passengers of the steamer had gone away." "So you were alone all the time?" "Yes, fortunately I had with me your address, and hiring a cab I drove up straight here." Well, your courage and presence of mind is really admirable, Swami. Please come upstairs. Then he went up to the fifth floor of the house with Miss Phillips, who showed him a small room which was arranged for his stay. Miss Phillips was a student of Swami Vivekananda and was the secretary to the Infant Vedanta Society of New York, which was started by Vivekananda at the request of some of his students. Mr. van Hagen was a Dutch, and since he came to be acquainted with Vivekananda and attended some of his lectures, became interested in the teachings of Vedanta. He called himself a brahmacharya, disciple of Swami Vivekananda. He was about 25 and not married. At the beginning, this Dutch young man was Abhedananda's companion and guide. Mr. van Hagen, Miss Waldo, and Mr. and Mrs. Goodwin were the early members of the society, which was then housed at the boarding house of Miss Phillips. Abhedananda found in this old unmarried lady not only a great admirer of Swami Vivekananda, but also a genuine seeker of truth, while the other members of the society were equally eager to come across the teachings of Vedanta. The first week after his arrival was spent in going round and seeing all the places of interest in New York in the company of Mr. van Hagen. What most interested the young preacher was a newly invented electroscope and photograph which he saw in the evening at the Savoy Theatre. I also saw through the big telescope the full moon as a globe brought so close to our eyes that I could see the mountains and valleys of the moon in minute details. Very soon he was acquainted with Mr. Leggett and Miss MacLeod, the two great admirers and friends of Swami Vivekananda. It is on record that a fortnight after his arrival in New York that Miss Phillips invited her friends to meet Swami Abhedananda. A grand reception was arranged for him in her spacious drawing room. As he wrote in his diary, she introduced me to her friends and I gave an informal talk about my work in London. In that meeting were present all the students, friends, and disciples of Swami Vivekananda. They were delighted to welcome me at New York and were pleased to have me in their midst as an accredited teacher of Vedanta and a spiritual brother of Swami Vivekananda. They admired my simple manners and good voice and faith in God and childlike purity of heart, and especially my love of truth. All of them liked my lucid explanations on various subjects connected with Raja Yoga and Vedanta philosophy. Here we get a true picture of Swami Abhedananda, the preacher as depicted by himself, and how this picture grew brighter and brighter in color and extraordinary in perspective and dimension created in the 25 years of his career becoming an esteemed Hindu preacher. But before we would like to refer to a letter which he wrote to Vivekananda in Calcutta before leaving for India. Vivekananda had foreseen that though Sharadananda was then working in America, at his instance, yet the day was not far when Abhedananda would also have to go there. So he arranged his passage and kept it with one of his English disciples in London, with a clear instruction to hand it over to Abhedananda when he might need it. So he considered it his first duty to apprise the leader of the new situation he was now put in. Let us quote the following from his diary. On my arrival at New York, I wrote a letter to Swami Vivekananda in which I requested him to write to his American friends to come forward and help me in my new field of work. In reply, Swami Vivekananda wrote to me from Calcutta that I must not depend on his friends, and that I should get my new people in to help me, and that I should stand on my own feet and struggle. To stand on his own feet and struggle. Only Swami Vivekananda could write this. The first reaction of this advice, we gather, was surprising, but he felt little discouraged and wrote, I was inspired with grim determination to depend entirely upon the will of the Lord, to go on working with the resolute heart of a brave soldier, neither thinking of the morrow nor of the results of my work. To work with the resolute heart of a soldier, Abhedananda could think in this way. The monk who wandered for 10 years across the length and breadth of India, barefooted and penniless, now in the role of a preacher, faced with the wide world with the same mental nerve as he evinced in the life of his leader, who also came penniless and a stranger to this distant land, only to conquer by dint of his extraordinary courage and spiritual approach. Abhedananda then remembered the saying of Lord Krishna in the Gita, "To work thou hast the right, and not for the fruits thereof." And as he remembered this, his mind became full of courage, and there came out the resolute, "I shall prove by my work that I am a true karma yogi and a real sannyasa." This was Abhedananda the preacher, and we shall see later on how he fulfilled this in letter and spirit. It has been recorded in the principal biography of Swami Vivekananda that since the arrival of Swami Abhedananda in New York, the interest in Vedanta philosophy received a new impetus. His life in America during the early years of preaching is nothing but the story of this new impetus, which was more or less due to the efforts of a determined soul, that of a brave soldier of Vedanta. We gather from his diary that at the end of the month, since Abhedananda arrived in New York, he visited Philadelphia, Washington, Virginia, and from September 29th, he established himself in New York, holding regular classes at the Vedanta Society and giving public lectures on Sundays to audiences that went on steadily increasing in number. He lectured also every week from November in Montclair, New Jersey, and earnest calls for classes came from Brooklyn and other places, which he was then unable to undertake for want of time. One memorable incident during this period was his meeting with Swami Sharadananda, who came from Boston to New York towards the end of September. It has already been mentioned that Sharadananda preceded Abhedananda, and he was sent to America from London by Swami Vivekananda at the request of Mrs. Ole Bull of Cambridge, Massachusetts, just before Abhedananda reached London in 1896. It is on record that Swami Sharadananda, since his arrival in America, was busily occupied in Cambridge, Boston and its vicinity, and could not be spared to take charge of the New York Center, which was looking after for the time being by Miss Ellen Waldo, known among the Brotherhood as Sister Haridasi. She was a disciple of Vivekananda, and she had assimilated the teachings of her master profoundly. Though Sharadananda's stay in America was not for a long period, yet from the contemporary press reports, we gather that he played an important part in the preaching of the gospel of Vedanta, and his lectures were regarded as thoughtful and scholarly. It was at the end of October 1896 that he delivered a beautiful lecture at the Brooklyn Ethical Association on the ethical ideas of the Hindus. Abhedananda, who was apprised of his brother monk's activities, was therefore eagerly waiting to meet him since his arrival in New York. Let us give here a description of this meeting from the pages of his American diary. "This was the first time I met him. After he had left India nearly 2 years ago, I spent the whole day with him, talking on different subjects and especially on the works he was doing in America. It was a great delight to me to meet my beloved Guru Bhai after such a long time in a foreign country. It reminded me of the days when we lived together and served our divine master Sri Ramakrishna in Kasapur Garden House, and after that, after his Mahasamadhi, how we lived together with Swami Vivekananda, who used to call us Kalua and Balua, for we were his personal attendants as well as his staunch followers in our struggles for spiritual attainment at the Baranagar Muth. How the Swami Sharadananda nursed me with the greatest brotherly love that I have never heard of for 4 months at the Alabazar Muth, when I had 7 operations on my left foot on account of the attack of the guinea worm, which I had caught while traveling barefooted through the Gujarat and Dwarka on a pilgrimage. All these and many other incidents of our spiritual lives together in India became vivid in my memory when I met Swami Sharadananda in New York. It was a day of unbounded joy and peace which I can never forget. As we read these lines, our mind naturally goes back to that memorable Christmas night of 1886 at Anpur, where the new communion of apostles was founded. Subsequent events reveal to us that the Brotherhood of Monks was not in vain, and the unseen forces of history worked behind it in such a manner that within less than a decade, Sri Ramakrishna's thought began to be translated into living action under the leadership of Vivekananda, who originated a new spiritual movement in the West, and the work of which was systematically carried on by some of his ablest brother monks, of whom Abhedananda was the most remarkable. It was not the memory of the bygone days alone that swelled up in his mind when he met Sharadananda. There were other emotions that were simultaneously surging in his mind, which have been beautifully expressed by Abhedananda in the following words. I felt that by the will of our great master, we have come to New York after traveling over 12,000 miles and crossing many seas and the Atlantic Ocean on the same mission to preach the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna among foreign people of Christian faith, just like the ancient Buddhist monks who preached the gospel of Buddha from Siberia to Ceylon and from China, Japan to Egypt. I felt within me the adventurous spirit of a modern Christian missionary who travels all over the world to preach the gospel of Christ among heathen nations, going through all kinds of privation, suffering, and hardship. Here we have a perfect glimpse of the young preacher's mind, and we can well imagine that Abhedananda also was ready to undergo all kinds of privation, suffering, and hardship to fulfill a great mission. It is well nigh impossible to compress within a few pages a full and systematic description of the widespread knowledge carried by Swami Abhedananda in the course of 25 years of his stay in America. Any attempt to give a cursory view of it will fail to convey to the readers our exact idea of the extent of the work and the ever-growing influence it exerted over the minds of numerous men and women who thirsted for the new and satisfying light from the East. We will only touch on a few salient episodes, which must be in the way of a mere index to his missionary career. Abhedananda began his real work in America with a series of lectures at Mott Memorial Hall in New York, which was rented by the Vedanta Society for the purpose. Beginning from September 29th, he used to deliver here on every Sunday lectures on Vedanta. The subject was announced, "What is Vedanta?" And this initial shot paved the path for the future preacher. Mott Memorial Hall, that delightful refuge for all wandering sects, had seen many orators, but none compared to the one it saw now in the person of this young Hindu preacher. Edward Emerson, a close relative of Ralph Waldo Emerson, the celebrated American poet and philosopher, presided on the first day of his lecture here, which was attended by some 40 people. The following lines, quoted from the book, With the Swamis in America, will be of interest to the readers, where it is noted, "The following Sunday afternoon found me amongst the audience at the Mott Memorial Hall, in the expectation of hearing Swami Vivekananda. The hall was not large, it could seat perhaps 300 or 400 people. And even then the hall was not quite filled, so it was easy to secure a good seat. I had heard much in praise of Vivekananda. My expectation was therefore turned to a high key, and I looked forward with pleasure to the fulfillment of a long cherished desire. Punctually at 3 o'clock, a Swami entered the hall. He was dressed in a robe and a turban of orange color. He went straight to the platform and, without a moment's delay, began to deliver his lecture. He opened with a sloka in Sanskrit. Dva supuna suyuja sakaya samana. This he gave also in English. Two birds of beautiful plumage, ever mates, perched on the self-same tree. One of the twain eats of the luscious fruit. Silent, its mate looks on. And then he began to explain the deep significance of this beautiful sloka from the Upanishad. The discourse was lucid, convincing, and impressive. There was not much flourish, not much eloquence, hardly any gesticulation. It was a straightforward and well-reasoned out exposition of the Vedanta philosophy, delivered in a calm, dignified manner. He had his subject well in hand, and his voice was clear and sonorous. Young, tall, straight, good-looking, the Swami had his appearance in his favor. His attitude, though not awkward, was a little stiff for a public speaker. There was not effort for effect. The speaker was natural and sincere, but there was not the ease and grace of manner so characteristic of most American speakers. It was evident that the Swami had not done much platform work, though speaking seemed to come easy to him. After the lecture, an opportunity was given to the audience to ask questions. The Swami answered all questions without the least hesitation. Then he came down from the platform and was immediately surrounded by a number of people anxious to meet him personally and to exchange a few words with him. I waited in the back of the hall and saw the Swami pass out to the street. I was very happy to have found a preacher from the land where Vedanta had taken birth. My expectation has been high, and I was not disappointed, except that I had not found the eloquence and fine delivery for which Swami Vivekananda had become famous. And I wondered how the Swami had earned his reputation as an orator, and doubted whether the speaker was really Swami Vivekananda. So I approached a gentleman in charge of the hall to satisfy my doubt, and then I was told that the Swami I had listened to was Swami Abhedananda, another disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. The writer of these lines, Mr. Haybloom, was initiated in the order of Sri Ramakrishna by Vivekananda afterwards, and later he had the initiation into sannyas from Abhedananda at the Belur Muth in 1921. He has further recorded his experiences of Abhedananda's class lectures, which constituted another aspect of his regular work in America that happened on every Wednesday, when he wrote, "There was a small gathering, perhaps not more than 20 people. The room was cozy. Incense was burning on a small table with pictures and flowers. The Swami was already seated, and the hostess offered me a seat near him. After a few minutes, the Swami opened the meeting with a prayer in Sanskrit. I think it was the well-known invocation at the beginning and the end of the Upanishads that states, 'May He protect us from all evil. May the teacher and the taught enjoy together the blessings of the Lord. May whatever we study be well studied, and may it enlighten us. May dissension be far from us. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om.'" How beautiful, how impressive sounded the ancient Sanskrit prayer as it was chanted by the Swami in his deep, melodious voice. How exquisite the intonation. This was followed by a few minutes of silence. The Swami sat erect, perfectly still, with his hands folded and his eyes closed. We all followed his example and meditated for a while. Then came a few remarks on the law of karma, and we were invited to ask questions. The questions were not systematic. All kinds of subjects were touched in, and the meeting lasted for an hour or more. After the meeting, I was introduced to the Swami. He was courteous. He asked me a few questions and hoped I could come again. I told him how very much I appreciated his lectures and how helpful they were to me. He seemed pleased and said, "Practice a little. The secret of success lies in meditation. Come here regularly, and when you are in doubt or you need any help, come to me." I thanked him and promised to do so. This was the end of our first meeting. The above description gives us a correct picture of the methods adopted by Swami Abhedananda, both in his public lectures as well as in the class lectures. It was in this way that he was able to bring about a spiritual awakening in the minds of a large number of religious-minded American men and women, and draw a band of sincere students of Vedanta around him. Somewhat reserved by nature, Abhedananda did not mix with his students as freely as some of his other brother disciples, who had gone to America with the same objective had done. He, however, held social meetings where the students could freely talk and mix with him. It is on record that he gave 1 hour each week to meeting people and inquiries personally. If by nature he was more or less reserved, it is equally true that in private life he was not easily accessible. He insisted, and not without reason, of course, on a certain amount of privacy. As it was written by the same gentleman who had the former account, this was probably wise and necessary on his part. The preacher who gave himself heart and soul to his work certainly needed hours of solitude to prosecute his studies and prepare his carefully thought-out lectures free from outside disturbance. But according to the testimony of some, one can always be assured of his ready assistance, his sympathy and encouragement when they made it a point to approach Swami Abhedananda. It was in this way that ultimately he was successful in giving Vedanta movement not only the form and content, but also enlivening it with purpose and direction, which it was initially lacking. As all the New York papers carried the notice of his Sunday lectures and class lectures held on every Wednesday and Saturday, the number of audience began to increase gradually and the movement gathered its momentum. Thus, the ripple started by his predecessor Vivekananda soon developed into a high current in the course of time and attracted all the truth seekers in the vicinity. Here is a description of Swami Abhedananda as given by the Boston Evening Transcript. The Swami Abhedananda is a young man of charming personality. He is a full-blooded Hindu and has been away from India only 3 years. He speaks English fluently. He delivered lectures in London for 10 months previous to coming to America, where he was invited by the Vedanta Society of New York, soon after the Queen's Jubilee in August 1897. Swami Abhedananda is a man about 30, perhaps above average height, with clear-cut features and a high forehead. He dresses in a flowing black gown, festooned tightly about the throat, and when he speaks in public he wears a graceful white turban. His English shows barely a sign of foreign accent, and his voice is soft and penetrating. He is a man who would attract attention anywhere. One of the earliest and most significant of his lectures in America was the one which Abhedananda delivered in New York at a church on December 27, 1897. The subject matter was A Hindu's View of Christ. This lecture was elaborately reported in a number of important papers such as The Sun, the Literary Digest, and other Episcopal journals, which also printed his photo. We quote the following from the Literary Digest of January 15, 1898. The Swami Vivekananda has been succeeded in America as a lecturer of Vedanta philosophy by the Swami Abhedananda, who recently delivered a very interesting lecture which was attended by a large number of clergymen belonging to all churches. The Swami advanced the theory that Christ was a yogi, which surprised the audience. Here are some of the illuminating lines from his lecture. To understand Christ, one must understand the Hindu conception of the soul and the universe, For Christ, although a Jew by race, was in every fiber of his character a Hindu or a Vedantist. And when the Christian looks at his Savior from the Hindu point of view, he will not only get a more beautiful and sublime conception of Christ, but he will receive a much better opinion of himself and his fellow men. All that Christ did and said will become vastly more interesting to him, for he can himself confidently hope someday to become a Christ himself. The beauty of the Vedanta view of Christ is to be able to realize from experience that you and I and all of us will someday, on this very earth, clothed in blood and flesh, become Christ-like. For in every one of us is the pure and sublime soul that shows forth from them on the Mount of Transfiguration. It needs only to be set free, to connect itself with the cosmic intelligence that stands behind and directly evolves and projects all those gross forms of matter that we see. In every one of us is a spark of this universal intelligent energy that is moving toward freedom. In Christ, in Buddha, and in many of our Hindu sages, this cosmic energy was set free. This particular lecture of Abhedananda had won for him a good deal of admiration from the Christian world of America, and on another occasion he was again invited to speak on the same subject. We quote the following from The Sun in New York, which devoted full 2 columns in reporting his lecture, which was delivered in a Catholic church on New Year's Day, 1898. When a few days ago I was invited to give a talk on the subject, I had some hesitation in my mind as to the reception. Now I feel encouraged today that the Hindu view of Christ, as I have explained the other day, has roused some interest in you. What do you see in yourself? First, the body, then behind it, the mind, and behind that, something that is conscious of them both. In a perfect man like Christ, the mind stuff has been purified, culminated in the absolute renunciation of all earthly desires. He was able to connect his own soul with the cosmic soul, or God, and then he exclaimed, "I and my Father are one." When a Vedantist reaches that state, he says, "I am Brahman." When a Mohammedan Sufi reaches that state, he says, "I am he." Every perfect man realizes that he is a part of this universal intelligence which we call God, or Brahman. And when he is able to make the connection with it through purified mind, he partakes of its omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence. If a minute history of India for the last 6,000 years could be written, we are assumed that there would be descriptions of many miracles performed by the sages, just as remarkable as any credited to Christ. What is the significance of Christ's death? Christ foresaw that his life and death would fix the mind of other men upon him, and this would help them to realize the divine nature within us all, our oneness with God. It is by such concentration of the mind that one is able to separate the soul from the mind and free it from the bondage of matter. His face on the cross is a shining example of complete resignation to God, which reveals at once the spiritual greatness of Christ. The people of the New World have seldom seen such illuminating interpretation of the life of the Savior as given by Swami Abhedananda.